The space game genre is in a remarkably good place at the moment, with independent developers leading the charge and bringing about some really amazing games that all have some innovative mechanics, stunning visuals, and some really ambitious game design. Right here then, we've got a comprehensive list of 20 notable indie space games that really are making waves here in 2025. Some of them are released already, they've been around for a little while, others are on the horizon and should be available pretty soon. What's more, many of these really do outshine their AAA counterparts, and in fact this is a follow-up video to the one where I spoke about the kind of collapse of the AAA space gaming arena. Something to watch out for, I'll link that in the video description if you want to check it out. But here we are in 2025 and the indie developers are really showing how it's done, from seamless planetary landings to intense dogfights and cooperative space exploration. These titles showcase the creativity of small development teams tackling the final frontier. And we'll start with X4 Foundations. This is by far the oldest franchise series in this list. It's been around since the late 90s. It's made by Egosoft. There's been a number of games within that franchise now, X4 Foundations being the latest. Now this one released all the way back in 2017, but it has had quite a few updates since then, some of them free, others paid. This is easily one of the most, if not the most, expansive space game out there. If you're interested in space sims in any way, then this really does have everything you'd expect to see in a traditional space simulation. From trade to combat, from bounty hunting to exploration, you can build your entire empire within this game, expanding across the stars with space stations, massive fleets of ships, including capital ships, and if you just want to, well, be a kind of a peaceful player, you can go out there and just mine to your heart's content. The galaxy here really is your oyster. X4 then really does represent the cream of the crop and is probably one of the best space sims out there. Do check it out. Next up, we come to Qanga. Now this is somewhat of a testament to what a small independent team can actually achieve in this genre. It is an early access title and it offers some very impressive seamless solar system recreations here. This is at a scale not quite of 1:1 but of 1:2, which means it's actually scaled at 50% of their real world counterparts, and that in itself is actually massive, much larger than many other games out there, including the large AAA titles such as Star Citizen and Starfield, which have much smaller planets than this. So what we got here is absolutely no loading screens whatsoever. Players can freely transition between space and planetary surfaces, exploring Earth, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and their respective moons. As a player, you take on the role of a cyborg with human consciousness. Transformed into the synthetic body, you engage in combat, trading, base building, and exploration across this solar system. Now what really does distinguish Qanga from other AAA titles out there is the technical achievement here. Seamless planetary transitions without hidden loading screens. Now a few AAA titles do this, Star Citizen is the notable one, very few others have actually accomplished this, so seeing it done by a small indie team is something that I personally found very impressive. The game incorporates both first and third person combat systems, a big range of vehicles, although some of them seem to be placeholder at the moment, but nonetheless you get the gist of what they're aiming for. There's a nice range of spaceships and anti-gravity craft and fully explorable planets as well. The game, of course, right now is still in very early development, but you can try it out. Links in the video description. Moving on, we come to Jump Ship. Now this one is not available just yet, but I was very fortunate enough to get access to it around about 2 weeks ago and did a play session with the developers. The game itself then is developed by an independent studio. They're called Keepsake Games, and it comprises of veterans from both AAA as well as indie backgrounds. It is an ambitious title and, well, it's all about multiplayer in an immersive environment where teamwork is all about, working together, and it's there for survival. Now, in this game, you won't find yourself taking part in classes and leveling up. Instead, you take part in a team and you can all get involved in a variety of different activities on board the ship, as well as in the first-person environments. So the game's, one of the game's most impressive features is the integration of various different space-based activities. Here, players transition between managing their spacecraft and engaging in on-foot exploration, creating a dynamic gameplay that really keeps teams constantly engaged. So you might want to repair your ship, for example, while the pilot is involved in combat with hostile enemies. Another person might be running around the ship trying to prevent fires, while the fourth person is sitting on the turrets helping out with the combat. In short, every player here plays a vital role, managing power systems, handling navigation, or coordinating during crisis situations. And this generates some genuine tension and some excitement during the challenging encounters. This one is a heck of a lot of fun, and I think it's going to have a lot of potential when it's released. Moving on to some spaceship dogfighting games, we come to Hunternet Starfighter. Now this is really a hardcore combat space simulator that prioritizes skill and realism. It's developed by CPU Dreams, and it is somewhat of an MMO starfighter that places players in humanity's last civil war, fighting for territory, resources, and key installations. The game features fixed weapons with no aim assist, and this means players really are going to have to properly lead targets, and it also includes some realistic blackout mechanics during those high G maneuvers. This then is all about some really hardcore combat. Now, during the play sessions, players can mine resources, build fleets to support their starfighters, form organizations within factions, and participate in competitive races and war games. The game's combat system really does emphasize skill over automation, as said, and that creates some intense dogfights, experiences that any players of online shooting games, space combat games have really long desired. Now currently it's available through backing on the official website or Indiegogo with early access keys. Hunternet Starfighter does promise to deliver the kind of deep space combat that even major studios have often struggled to achieve. So yeah, if you're into space shooters, then you may want to try that one out. Moving on, we come to Remnant Protocol, a game that merges high-intensity space combat reminiscent of classics like TIE Fighter with deep strategic elements of base management we've seen in other titles like XCOM. Now, players take charge of a Sanctuary, a covert rebel outpost hidden on the outer reaches of the galaxy. Leading the remnants of a once great force still loyal after the assassination of the Blessed Mother, their goal is to wage a guerrilla campaign against the oppressive usurpers who have seized control. Gameplay blends of fast-paced dogfights in customizable starfighters with resource management, ship production, research, espionage, and alliance building. A standout feature here is the game's dynamic galaxy, with various factions who compete for dominance in the wake of the power vacuum left by the assassination. Because of the way that this game is set up, it means that every decision that the players make will ripple outwards and therefore influence the game as a whole. There's not a whole lot of details on this title beyond that because it is still in development, but it does have a planned release date for 2025. Now, next up, we come to the strategic space combat games, the RTS type games and the grand strategies. Let's start with one of the most highly anticipated of this batch, Fallen Frontier. This one has been on the horizon for a very long time. Hopefully, it's going to make the release for 2025. The game has a very interesting navigation system that allows players to seamlessly zoom from broad strategic overviews to detailed combat areas while action continues throughout the map. So yeah, combat continues all over the solar system here, or the solar system, depending on where you're situated. So this is a feature that could really redefine expectations for space RTS games going forward. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this one because I've spoken about it many times before. Suffice to say, this one is highly anticipated and very much at the top of my radar. Starminer blends space exploration, RTS, mining and tower defense elements into a unique combination. It's set for release later this year and is another one of those titles that I was fortunate enough to get my hands on back in December. Now this game is very interesting indeed and is quite a unique take on the overall space, a space sim genre really. Players begin with a modest ship, as you might expect with this type of game, and they're tasked with locating and mining valuable minerals from asteroid fields and scattered debris all throughout the map, and this can include abandoned spaceships and abandoned space stations. The game then goes beyond simple resource gathering to include combat and space base building. So yeah, you can build your own spaceships and your own stations. You kind of start small and then keep expanding. Throw in a mix of Newtonian physics and you end up with a pretty good blend of gameplay here. Looking forward to seeing this one coming up later this year. Now, if narrative-driven space adventures are more your thing, then there's a few titles here as well. We've got Project Vespari. This one is built in the Unreal Engine 5, and it creates an atmospheric experience combining really beautiful visuals with a really in-depth narrative design as well. So the story here branches based on player choices, and that will lead eventually to multiple potential outcomes. What makes the game here particularly interesting and hopefully quite different is its attention to a scientific detail while maintaining the dramatic tension. The backdrop itself, the planet Venus, provides an integral part of the story, with the hostile environment constantly influencing both gameplay and the narrative developments. So while it's not technically a space game, you won't be flying around in spaceships after all, this is definitely a space sci-fi game, and if you're interested in stories, then this is certainly one to watch. Moving on, we come to Citizen Sleeper 2. This one follows up on the critical success of the original, and it continues the dice-based tabletop RPG-inspired mechanics, and all set in a gritty sci-fi world. The game's mechanics revolve around a dice-based system where players roll to fulfill prompts and manage their energy bar, creating a rather unusual blend of resource management and narrative exploration. It is an indie title, and one that demonstrates how smaller teams can create deep emotional experiences in a space setting without the massive budgets of AAA productions. The original Citizen Sleeper was highly respected. It garnered a lot of interest and a lot of positive reviews. And despite what may on the surface appear to be fairly simple visuals and fairly simple game mechanics, these all blend together to tell a very compelling story. And the sequel follows those very same trends. Not releasing just yet, Exodus is one coming further down the line. Now, this title is potentially not really an indie title. It is kind of a AAA title in many respects. It's coming from AAA talent, from a brand new studio, and quite obviously has a big budget. But we're going to put it in here regardless. Exodus is an ambitious sci-fi game. It's an action-adventure RPG, and it's in development by Archetype Entertainment, a studio composed of industry veterans with some rather impressive credentials. The game itself draws inspiration from myths and legends surrounding the enigmatic Elohim, whose influence shapes the game's setting even 15,000 years after their time. This intriguing premise establishes a narrative framework that blends science fiction elements with ancient mysteries. Time dilation is a big part of this game, and it serves as the core gameplay mechanic in Exodus, where time passes differently in various areas of the game world. And what this means is that decisions you make in one part of the game you can return to hundreds of years later to see how they played out. Whilst hundreds of years might have taken place within the universe, only very little time will have taken place for you due to that time dilation game mechanic. It's a game that has drawn more than a few comparisons to Mass Effect, and the debut trailer unveiled at the Game Awards 2023 provided players with their first glimpse into the richly detailed universe, and the involvement of actor Matthew McConaughey really will be bringing some pretty hefty talent to the project. Starship Simulator is a space sim. It's perhaps one of the most interesting space sims out there, quite obviously heavily inspired by the Star Trek franchise. It really does represent a meticulous approach to space exploration gaming, offering players the opportunity to command their own deep space vessel with unprecedented detail and realism. Set in a true one-to-one recreation of the Milky Way galaxy, you can discover distant uncharted worlds throughout your journey. And what really sets Starship Simulator apart from other space games of this type is the focus on complete ship accessibility. Here, players can enjoy unrestricted access to absolutely every deck of their Magellan-class deep space exploration vessel. And think here in terms of having your very own USS Enterprise. Ship systems are fully simulated, and that requires players' interaction and management throughout voyages. This attention to detail then extends from navigation and propulsion to life support and scientific equipment. It really does give a comprehensive simulation of what operating an interstellar vessel might be like. If you've ever wanted to be Captain Picard, then here's your chance. Again, this one is still in active development, but it's coming along very well indeed. In the Black is an upcoming space sim, and it puts you at the helm of your very own spaceship in a meticulously crafted universe where intrigue and survival challenges await. Now, this is another one of those titles that aims for realistic flight mechanics, and unlike more arcade-style space games, In the Black implements a physics-based flight model that authentically reproduces the challenges and nuances of maneuvering the spacecraft in a zero-G environment. And it's an approach that creates a more immersive and challenging experience that rewards tactical thinking and careful planning. The game also offers various modes to accommodate different playstyles, from mission-based scenarios to more open-ended exploration opportunities. Ship customization plays a significant role here in the overall experience, and that means players can modify and upgrade their vessels to better suit specific missions or really just their personal preference. Combat itself is a huge focus and emphasizes strategic positioning and resource management rather than just pure firepower, and that ultimately the aim here, the developers say, is to create tense encounters that test players' abilities. Next up, we come to a 4X grand strategy game. This one is Beyond Astra. It's developed by a solo developer at Nebula Games and draws inspiration from classics like Civilization, Spore, Star Wars Empire at War, and Master of Orion. It's a title that aims to blend the best elements of 90s strategy games with some more modern design sensibilities. So here then, in this game, the players get the ability to design and create a society from scratch and define every aspect of your species, characteristics from political to cultural leanings. Players then can determine their species' climate adaptation capabilities and consciousness level before guiding their civilization through 3 core skill trees, and these are science, culture, and religion. The game employs a Spore-like progression system, where players begin on a single planet, exploring their local environment before eventually reaching for the stars. And you might expect, with such an idea, it does also mean that you can zoom seamlessly down to the planet's surfaces and focus on city planning, as well as the more macro idea of strategy in space and across the cosmos. Ship customization also offers some rather wide range of options here, with fully rotating turrets and advanced collision systems here, which will hopefully add a layer of tactical gameplay. If you want to test this one out right now, a demo is available on Steam. Well worth taking a look if you happen to find this type of game particularly interesting. Annihilate The Spance is another strategy title. This one is an RTS rather than a grand strategy, and what makes this one particularly unusual is the sheer massive scope of space battles. And yeah, that does mean that you can have many ships in your fleets. In fact, hundreds, if not thousands. Story-wise, players experience a single-player campaign that contains 3 distinct playable factions and numerous sub-factions as well. The core gameplay loop revolves around base building and fleet composition, with an emphasis on constant production that maintains uninterrupted action. And yeah, like I say, what that means is hundreds, if not thousands of ships, as your ships constantly keep respawning. So rather than focusing on individual unit control, players here make decisions about resource allocation, base development, and broad tactical directives. And essentially, that means you're relying on the AI of your fleets to execute effectively in the combat situations they find themselves in. Annihilate The Spance is available right now. Now, perhaps one of the largest indie space games could arguably be Space Engineers. Space Engineers 2 is also available now, and this is really ultimately aiming to expand upon the original. Now, this sequel does follow from the same core concepts that the original game had, which means in many respects some people may find it to be essentially the same game, but there are a few significant changes here. One of those is the new 25cm unified grid system. That means you've no longer got different sized blocks. All of them work fundamentally are the same size, and this means you now have a new precision level of building. So yes, that means a new seamless combination of blocks for more complex builds, and that should hopefully ultimately give players the tools to create everything from starships to space stations with remarkable detail and functionality going way beyond what was possible in the original title. Space Engineers 2 is available right now in early access, and it's releasing bit by bit, vertical slices one at a time. Vertical Slice 1 has already been released. That is the basic components of the game. Later on, we'll see other vertical slices which will deliver more gameplay and more environments, including planets and planetary surfaces. SpaceCraft is a relatively newly announced title, and at this point in time we don't know a huge amount about it. It is an online space exploration game, and it also features build-in. The game's narrative unfolds in the year 2350, where humanity faces an existential crisis after accidentally awakening powerful machines called tripods. These formidable entities, nothing to do with the H.G. Wells series of course, instigated a century-long war that brought humankind to the brink of extinction. Just as all hope seemed lost, a mysterious message provided coordinates to a hidden portal leading to an uncharted galaxy. The remaining survivors escaped through this gateway, seeking a new beginning in the vast unknown of space. Now, gameplay apparently is going to centre around exploration across solar systems and planets using faster-than-light travel, and this should allow instantaneous jumps between distant star systems. Players will pilot their spacecraft, scan planets for valuable resources, and discover abandoned space stations and derelict ships that may hold vital supplies or technology. There's also going to be a range of planetary services here involved, where you can also find further resources. So yeah, resource management does form a core gameplay loop here, with players mining raw materials to craft essential items and ship components. And ship construction is highly customizable, allowing for vessels of various sizes from nimble scouts to massive transport ships. Ultimately, it seems the goal here is to create a player-driven economy. There's a lot of base building space games out there at the moment, so this one hopefully is going to introduce a somewhat new twist. And talking of twists and city building, we come to Beyond These Stars, and this twist is the idea of everything being built on the back of majestic space worlds. Space worlds are pretty iconic when it comes to space games now because they go back a long time. My earliest encounter with these was in the 90s with the Starglider series. So the game's premise here revolves around the relationship between the settlers on the back of the whale, Qanga, and the space whale that serves as both home and transportation. Players must decide how to interact with this creature, whether to exploit its resources regardless of consequences, or alternatively to attempt to live in harmony, or maybe even find some middle ground between the two. Additionally, players can attempt to influence Qanga's journey through space, although if you try and exercise too much control, you may find unintended repercussions both for the whale itself as well as the civilization it carries. Qanga traverses through a procedurally generated universe, and it passes various planets that may contain vital resources, and here players can establish outposts on these worlds to extract the different minerals. But you've got to convince Qanga to remain in the proximity long enough to complete these operations. The game is set to release later in 2025. Also, with a scheduled release for 2025 is Capital Command, and this is an immersive space sim that puts players in command of a powerful capital ship that's engaged in tactical combat across the far reaches of space. Now, this one is being published by Hooded Horse, who have published many really good titles over the years. This is going to be a somewhat detailed space sim that really hopefully will challenge players to navigate the complexities of space during warfare, whilst also managing the various systems of the crew on board the vessel. Now, when it comes to the gameplay itself, it seems that movement is going to be quite a key component, and this is because it's somewhat realistic. There's a big commitment to realistic space physics, and this means ships utilise 6 degrees of freedom, allowing movement in all directions whilst adjusting pitch, roll and yaw to optimise targeting and defensive positioning. That also means players must embrace inertia in the vacuum of space, either manually adjusting thrust vectors or utilising automated navigation systems to manoeuvre their vessel effectively. The game also features procedurally generated campaigns that continuously challenge the players with various imminent threats, whilst also presenting opportunities to acquire resources and new equipment. Fragile Existence is another ambitious space game coming from publisher Hooded Horse. Set in the year 2713, the game presents a grim scenario where Earth and the near-Earth territories have been virtually annihilated by an unknown enemy. Players assume the command of humanity's last remaining fleet, tasked with ensuring the survival of the species against seemingly impossible odds. What makes Fragile Existence particularly interesting, potentially at least, is its seamless integration of space and planetary gameplay. Ships can travel between planets without loading screens, moving in realistic orbital spheres when around planetary bodies. The freedom of movement then really does create some additional depth as players position assets throughout the star system. When deploying to planetary surfaces, players utilise traditional RTS controls to direct ground units and establish bases, and these groundside operations focus on gathering resources to build new units, upgrade existing ones, construct settlements, and replenish fleet supplies. You'll then have direct interaction between orbital fleets and ground forces, which, well, keeps things rather unique and unusually interesting here, doesn't it? It seems that rather than expanding outward, as is traditional for 4X games, Fragile Existence requires players to take their empire with them, managing passengers and crew's happiness whilst balancing the loyalties of various factions aboard the fleet. No specific set release date for this one just yet, but it is looking for at a 2025 window. Lastly, we come to another RTS game. This is called Era 1. It's a title that blends real-time strategy elements with extensive ship customization. And it seems that the ship customization is pretty comprehensive here. Players begin with a primary core ship or a base and expand that by assembling modules referred to as cubes or bricks in a three-dimensional space to create capital ships, stations, floating bases, and even space cities. Different module types serve specific purposes. Structural modules provide customization options, for example. Dedicated modules handled resources and energy production, and hangar modules enabled fighter and cruiser creation, whilst other modules are used to manage population, weaponry, and subsystems. Classified as a spaceship builder with a survival game set in an RTS environment, Era 1 balances creative constructions with combat. This one looks visually very nice indeed and is currently scheduled for release in July 2025. No list of indie space games would be complete without mentioning EVERSPACE 2. This is one of my favourite space games of the lot, this alongside perhaps X4 Foundations. EVERSPACE is a really nice combat looter shooter set in a fantastic space environment. No, I'm not going to talk about this too much in this video because I've spoken about it many times before, but I did want to mention it. It's 100% essential to include this because it's really fantastic. Do check it out. It's linked in the video description. So there we have it, a long list of different space games available from indie studios, and it really does, to me at least, indicate that space games are going through somewhat of a renaissance yet again, thanks to the efforts of various different indie studios. Whilst some AAA space games have fallen by the wayside and not quite lived up to hopes and expectations, it seems that indie studios are carrying the torch into the future, and it's looking rather bright, at least I think so. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments sections below. Thanks for watching this rather long video all the way through. There is another one on the screen right here if you want to check that out. Thanks again, take care, and I'll catch you next time.